So thank you for joining us today for our online service on Sunday, the 11th of July, 2021. Hopefully a big day in history for this country, a day that we'll look back on for many years to come, a bit like 30th of July, 1966. Well, hopefully anyway. So you nervous about later? Is it coming home? Surely is. It's got to be. Now, my boss went to the game on Wednesday, the semi-final on Wednesday, and he was sending pictures through and videos of the crowd, and it just looked amazing experience. So I just can't imagine what it'll be like tonight when we win, and I do mean when we win. But one thing I've loved about the England games is actually you see a lot of the local club flags out. So have you noticed them? Quite often draped over the balconies around the stadium. Like big red and white England flags, but with the likes of like Derby County or Bletchley or Wimbledon, all kind of written across the centre of the flags. And what fascinates me really is that you get what is normally rival teams. Quite often the flags are displayed next to each other. So Aston Villa and Birmingham, or Sheffield Wednesday, Sheffield United. Fans that on a normal week would be complete enemies if their teams were playing each other. They will probably hail abuse at either ends of the ground, but then here they are, stood side by side in unity, supporting the national side. It's still a football match. They're still watching 11 players against 11 players. They're still kicking a ball around the pitch. And they probably disagree on who the best player is. They maybe disagree on the tactics of the manager. But they'll still sing together in unison, cheer together when a goal's scored, and jump wildly when England win, hopefully. Now, it's the same in our church and it's the same in life in general. How much more joy do we get when we live together in unity rather than disunity? When there's no sides but just one voice, no unnecessary tension, no unnecessary arguments. Now, this is the topic we're going to explore in a little bit more detail this morning. Now, as you're aware, over this kind of summer months, we're looking at the topic of joy. And this week, we're looking at joy in unity and fellowship. Now, there's a number of passages in the Bible that speak on this topic, such as 2 John 1, verse 12, that reads, I have much to write to you, but I do not want to use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to visit you and talk with you face to face so that our joy may be complete. A real desire, obviously, to meet in person, to share fellowship and experience joy in the togetherness or oneness. It's a feeling that a number of you have expressed over the last year. Particularly when we've all been separated in our own homes, when we've been in lockdown, really a real desire to celebrate together and to share fellowship again in person at Maghull Baptist Church. Another example is in Paul's letter to the Philippians in chapter 1, verses 3 to 5, where it says, I thank my God every time I remember you. In all my prayers for all of you, I always pray with joy because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now. Now, these verses really demonstrate the great joy experience in fellowship between Christians. It's great now that we're able to meet in person, but even when we didn't, a number did comment on how they enjoyed the fellowship that we were still able to get over Zoom. We were still able to share, we were still able to talk, we were still able to pray with each other. I know it's not the same as being in person, but it was good to be able to kind of share in some of that as well. The verses I'd like to focus on this morning come from the end of that first chapter to the church in Philippi, in Philippians chapter 1. I'm going to read verse 17, and then I'm going to skip into Philippians 2 and read verses 1 and 2. So Philippians 1:17 reads, Whatever happens, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. Then, whether I come and see you or only hear about you in my absence, I will know that you stand firm in the one Spirit, striving together as one for the faith of the gospel. And then moving to chapter 2, verse 1, where it says, Therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind. Now, there's so much we can probably take from those three verses alone, but about how we should conduct ourselves, maybe in a way that demonstrates God's message, God's gospel, and maybe even how we should be encouraging towards each other, about being standing firm against challenges and obstacles, all different things that Paul was sharing to the church there. But I'd like to focus specifically on Philippians 2, verse 2. where Paul says that his joy will be complete when we are all like-minded, having the same love and of one spirit. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time exploring each of those three items and looking at how maybe this is relevant for MEC moving forward. So firstly, what does it mean to be like-minded? Now, one of the things I think it's worth me pointing out is that we're all different. It's a good job too, I think, when you may be looking at my hair. I bet you're glad you've not got that. But it's not just looks that we're different. Our minds are different. How we think, how we've got different perceptions of the world and of those around us. And this kind of really hit me not so long ago, actually, in my really kind of reflection, understanding of myself. Now, how I think of myself isn't how everybody else thinks of me. It isn't how my wife Sue thinks of me. It isn't how my friends think of me. And it isn't how my works colleagues think of me. Each of them think of me in a slightly different way. And it's quite a sobering realization, because it's common to think that everyone's identical. They all think in our way. So if we think about something, we've got a view on something, then everyone's going to kind of think the same thing. So, for example, the shirt I've got on. So some of you may look at that and go, plain white? It's a bit boring, contrast with his face. And other people may look at it and go, oh, I like that shirt. I wonder where he got it from. Other people may look at it and go, do you know what, it'd look better with stripes. Now, it's the same shirt. It's just different perceptions around the same thing. So who's right and who's wrong? So when Paul says be like-minded, he doesn't mean be exactly the same, because we can't be. It's impossible. We're all unique. God made us that way. We've got different perspectives on the world around us, and we often have different views on the same topic. And that's okay. What's not okay is when we only consider our view as the only view. So 1 Corinthians 3 verses 17 to 20 says, in the following directives, I have no praise for you, for your meetings do more harm than good. In the first place, I hear that when you come together as a church, there are divisions amongst you, and to some extent I believe it. No doubt there have to be differences among you to show which of you have God's approval. So then, when you come together, it's not the Lord's Supper you eat, for when you are eating, some of you go ahead with your own private suppers, and as a result, one person remains hungry and others get drunk. Very interesting verses. And it's good to actually see that it's not really a recent problem, as Paul recognised, disagreements within the church in Corinth at that time. We also recognise, I guess, that we have to be, on reflection, we have to be acknowledged that we've been like this probably as a church in Maghull Baptist in recent years too. And what happens with disunity really is a removal of joy. A removal of joy from our personal lives, our spiritual lives, and certainly from our church lives. And ultimately, a removal of joy really reflects and is evident to those around us, particularly those we're desperate to be able to share our faith with. So let me be really clear though, having the same mind doesn't mean blind agreement on every subject and every issue that comes up, but it means to be united in our purpose and motivation within the church. Having differences of opinion are healthy. If you think about those verses I read from 1 Corinthians, Paul quoted, there have to be differences among you to show which of you have God's approval. So it's acknowledged that we will be different. So how do we work ourselves through this? Now, those football fans I mentioned earlier stood on the terraces, probably as well from very different social backgrounds. Many will have had different political persuasions and probably would share contrasting views on life. But it doesn't matter. For that time they're there, they've got a common purpose and a common vision, and that being the success of the team they're supporting. Now, they may even have different views about tactics of the team, whether the manager should make substitutes and you know, who's the best player. But it doesn't divide them. There's a greater purpose to what they're about. So we must maintain that common purpose for us, that common direction as a church. Understand that we're here to make disciples, not divisions, and keep our minds really on who the enemy really is. Now, in doing this, any disagreements and different perceptions will become smaller and less relevant, as we all recognise the common purpose we have here as a church. So unity creates joy. It's very evident. And joy creates unity. It's kind of a self-perpetuating circle. But it is also something that's so noticeable and it can be broken very easily. So how do we prevent this? How do we strengthen our ability to disagree agreeably? And I think in the next thing that Paul states in this passage in Philippians, I think is at the core of it, and that's love. So I'll read that full verse out again from Philippians 2:2. It says, Then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind. So a relationship works when the love for the two is greater than the love for the one, where each person is prepared to sacrifice what they want and bow to the wishes of the other. Now, it doesn't just take one person to take that approach, it takes both. And it needs to be reciprocated and demonstrated by both people within that relationship. Now, you're hopefully familiar with our Bible motto text for this year, which is, by everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. And it's from John 13:35. But it does actually start with the phrase, by this. So, by what? So let's look at the verse prior. So John 13:34 says, a new commandment I give to you, love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. So if we can love each other as God loved us, as Jesus loved us, then it'll be evident to everyone around us of how we are and who we are. So love each other. And that's kind of the easy bit, even though I know it's a bit tricky. But the verse actually says, love each other as Jesus has loved you. Now this is when it gets difficult. John 15:13 says, greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. Jesus' love for us was so much more than we even deserve. Even though we don't deserve it, he died on the cross for us. Now that's God's love for us, and that's Jesus' love for us. So is Jesus actually asking us to sacrifice our lives for each other? I don't think it's that extreme, but what level of love does it take to lay down your life for somebody else? That's really not holding back on one thing, not one thing for your benefit. It's giving everything for others. And that's the love that Jesus wants us to share with each other. And that's the foundation for unity in God's church and in our church in Maghull. And it's how we can then become truly like-minded. Now, if you want an easy way to remember it, then you'll notice that the you comes before the I in the word unity. And if we put others before ourselves, then that's the demonstration of Jesus to those around us. Now, if we insist on always having our own way, deliberately distancing ourselves from others who don't really align with our ways, then how much more are we missing out on God's provision? Now, the best analogy that I came across for this is like a snowflake. So a snowflake on its own is pretty ineffective. It may be pretty, it may look nice, it may be unique, as we often see with snowflakes, but on its own, it isn't going to do a lot. But if you actually bind those snowflakes together, look how powerful they become. Look at things like avalanches and stuff and the power that goes behind it. If all of those snowflakes were all laid out and kind of separated, they were not joined up, then you kind of lose the power that there's potential that's there. And this message of love, I guess, is pretty consistent throughout the Bible, and particularly in the New Testament. So it's really no surprise that it was the foundation of Paul's message on unity and fellowship. So let's move on to the third part of what Paul outlined to make his joy complete, and that's to be one in spirit. Now, there's a number of verses in the Bible that describe being one in spirit. Ephesians 4:4 says, there is one body and one spirit, just as you were called to one hope when you were called. And then 1 Corinthians 6:17, but whoever is united with the Lord is one with him in spirit. But the specific passage I want us to reflect on is from John 17, and it's where Jesus is praying specifically for his disciples at this time, but it was the day before he was crucified. And we'll read from verse 17, so John 17, verse 22, which says, I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be as one as we are one. I in them and you in me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me. So being in one spirit is being one with God, one with Jesus, and importantly, one with each other. And this can only really be possible if Jesus is at the centre of all our thoughts, our vision, and our decisions. Now, as I shared earlier, it's only human nature to have differences of opinion on things, different perspectives on what could or should happen as a church. Having disagreements is always going to happen. And this is even more so when people are passionate about something. And it's something I do pray for. I pray that we are passionate as part of the revival at this church. So there will be times when we do have disagreements. Now, when I read of an encounter like this later on in Philippians from chapter 4, verse 2, it says, I plead with Euodia and I plead with Syntyche to be the same mind in the Lord. Yes, and I ask you, to my true companion, help these women. Also in 1 Corinthians 1, verse 11, my brothers and sisters, some from Chloe's household have informed me that there are quarrels amongst you. What I mean is this. One of you says, I follow Paul. The other, I follow Apollos. Another, I follow Cephas. And still another, I follow Christ. But the next verse in 1 Corinthians sums it up really nicely with a very simple rhetorical question. Is Christ divided? And the answer to that is clearly no. So if Christ isn't divided and our call is to be one spirit with him, how can we be divided? So as I draw this talk to a close, I want to just reflect on how much more joyful things are when we're moving forwards together with a common purpose and a common goal. Now, I personally feel that we've done more of this over the last 12 months. The pandemic has changed us all. It's changed us in how we look at each other, how we feel about each other, and what we think is most important. And I feel really at the moment we're now starting to kind of move together in unity. It doesn't mean we'll always agree on things. Now, Paul's guidance to the church in Philippi was really clear and summarised very well if you actually read the Message translation of Philippians 2:2, which says, if you have a heart, if you care, then do me a favour, agree with each other, love each other, be deep-spirited friends. So let us learn to disagree agreeably, to respect each other's differences, and remember that true purpose of our calling as Christians. Through this, let's then revel in the joy of fellowship together, so much so that we're a congregation that our community is attracted towards and wants to spend time with, understanding more about what we're about. Amen.